But since we started talking about Clemson, we use the phrase all year long, these things have a way of working themselves out. Well, that pretty much explains the ACC eliminating itself from any playoff conversation. Carolina did that the week before against Georgia Tech. And then Clemson, who could have, if Carolina was a 10-win team in Charlotte on Saturday night, and Clemson was 12-1 after beating Carolina, then maybe Clemson is still in the mix if somebody else falters. But
Clemson's ahead of Alabama. Like if Clemson doesn't blow it, heck,
right.
If Clemson makes one more play against South Carolina and is able to win that game by any margin, then Ohio State's at 5, Clemson's at 6. Clemson is likely eliminated, as it depends on what you think about TCU, where the path that Clemson would need would be both Utah over USC on Friday night and then Kansas State blowing the doors off of TCU,
right.
Which, granted, the way that Kansas State was beating TCU in the first half of the game those two teams played earlier this year, it's not totally unlikely. No. Long odds the way that TCU is playing, but Clemson, if it had made one more play, gotten one more score, would have been in the number 6 spot in these college football playoff rankings, and just needing a Kansas State blowout win and a Utah win over USC to be able to keep that door open.
Chip Patterson is with us, as he is every Wednesday. But didn't it really tell us more about Clemson? And I go, whether it's the game at Notre Dame, the close call at home with Syracuse, weren't those teaching moments for us about what Clemson really was as a team?
I think that we've seen it more on the back half of the season as the defense has deteriorated, and it has deteriorated really starting on the back end of that defense. And that secondary allowed explosive plays to Louisville, and that secondary got torched by Spencer Rattler. And what we have seen from that group goes all the way back, honestly, to the Wake Forest game, when Sam Hartman just continued to move the ball down the field against him, so much so that the Clemson defensive staff had to say, all right, we're just going to give up on pass rush because we have to commit so many bodies to defending these Wake Forest wide receivers that we can't worry about trying to get into the backfield, which, as you and I have discussed, led to Wake Forest running the ball because they just simply had numbers in the box. So defensively, it's interesting. I think North Carolina is going to be facing an easier defensive challenge going up against Clemson than it did against NC State. I think NC State has the ACC's best defense, and that defense did clearly a fantastic job against North Carolina. And now I think life is actually going to be not as easy on the offensive line, but, NC State's defensive line is still really good too.
Yeah.
So we've been doing all the frustration and all the hand-wringing about there's not great wide receivers at Clemson, and DJU has not been good, and the offense looks kind of stodgy and clunky, but defensively, this has not been the elite unit that we were expecting either, and I think that was especially exposed against the Gamecocks.
Well, here's what I want to go back to the Wake Forest game just for a little bit. I know Wake Forest threw the ball with great success against Clemson, but in the last part of that game, they lined up and ran it well too, and had they not gotten a couple of plays where they got behind the chains, or they call it off schedule, I guess.
Off schedule.
Then it looked to me like they were going to be able to run the ball down the field and beat Clemson. So maybe those two things work. They probably do work hand in hand, where having to commit so many players to the pass defense eliminated took players off the line of scrimmage and made all of that more difficult. Maybe all of it's related. It probably all is related. But anyway, we didn't see the same Clemson team. And they haven't had a really good offensive line in a number of years. So, and as good a running back as Will Shipley is, to not have a great running game as a team, I think is noticeable. When I watch them, I don't see a team that can line up and run it at you when they're going to run it at you.
the frustration within this Clemson community is so notable right now because it's created this position where all you were thinking at the end of last season was we need to get back to our place, which is running this conference.
Right.
6 straight conference championships. Clemson fans know the hotels they like to stay in. They know the restaurants they like to go to. They got whole daggum weekend routines set up for the first Saturday in December. And they're back and they're here. And do they want to win? I mean, of course they want to win, but I would argue that a Clemson fan might just not want to lose because this Clemson team needs to make changes.
Yeah.
They need to bring in fresh ideas. They need to change things up because this Clemson team, if they win against North Carolina on Saturday night and the offense looks good, Dabo gets to go to the podium and say, see, this was my guy all year long. You guys doubted him. You know, everybody
we're waiting for that.
Everybody tells me about what they got to do, but y'all, we just won an ACC championship, and last I heard, conference championships are hard to win. I mean, he's doing that like you should be happy for the success that we had, and he kind of teased it at the end of last year when he said we're not guaranteed anything. You know, we need to stop taking winning for granted. And the fact is that if Clemson wins the ACC championship and Dabo is reinforced that nothing is wrong, and then he uses that to not make any changes, then we are only going to continue to see Clemson fall short of those larger national goals.
If we hadn't watched North Carolina over the last 2 weeks, then it would be much easier for me to go, I think Carolina's going to beat them. And I think Carolina could, because I think Carolina's offense could be good enough, even though they don't have much of a running game. And maybe Clemson can just worry about one side of the ball. But my feeling about UNC is this. When the moment is big, they aren't. That's what I have seen this year. And this is a big moment, I think. Am I wrong?
So I'm trying to think. I thought that in Wake, I will push back because I think that to use Mac Brown's own assessment, North Carolina was not that much better than its schedule this year. So North Carolina actually was bigger in those moments than the team was good because North Carolina found ways to make plays against Pitt. North Carolina found ways to make plays against Wake Forest. North Carolina found ways to make plays against Duke. North Carolina finished at the top of the Coastal Division with, again, Matt Brown's own assessment of his team when they weren't that much better than anybody else in that Coastal Division. They just happened to show up and make the winning plays that they needed down the stretch. They did not make those plays against NC State. They did not make those plays against Georgia Tech. But for a large portion of this schedule, it was a team that was playing with fire that was showing up and making the plays that it needed to down the stretch. I think that North Carolina is coming in as the looser team. I think that it would be hilarious to watch North Carolina bounce back from 2 losses to win the ACC championship. And I think that you've got the better quarterback and you're playing with a very different set of expectations. I would not be surprised if the Tar Heels claim their first conference title in 42 years on Saturday night.
I won't be surprised either. And the reason I said it the way I did, because I think just in terms of XO strength, weakness, I think Carolina can easily win this game. Easily is the wrong term there, but that will not surprise me at all. I don't know what the spread is. I think they're probably a touchdown underdog if I was guessing.
7 and a hook.
Oh, I would take if none of these, because I think there's a difference between the moment and winning those games. I think Pitt was just okay. I actually think that the Duke loss, to me, was way more on Duke than it was on North Carolina, although Carolina stepped through the crack in the door and won the game late. I thought that was, Duke had 2 touchdowns called back by penalty. Right.
Wake was a win, though.
No, that was a good win. That was their best moment of the season. And I would agree with you that is more of a moment than some of those other wins that Carolina won late. But the opportunity against Notre Dame was a total no-show. Kicking the Georgia Tech game, I actually think the Georgia Tech loss way worse than the NC State loss. And I know State was down to their fourth quarterback. I don't care. State's offense was their offense this year. They could have had their ninth quarterback and been almost as effective the way they played offense for much of the season. But that defense was elite. They were awesome.
A Josh Downs drop against Georgia Tech,
right, and
multiple missed chip shot field goals against NC State. There's very fine margins with this, both ways, I think, for the Tar Heels.
All right, we'll talk more. We haven't even talked about the playoff yet. You hinted at it with TCU. So when we come back, we're going to talk about, I think the first two are locks, no matter what happens on Saturday.
Unless Michigan shutters its program. I was just asked on CBS Sports HQ, the segment's actually about to run here in the next 3 minutes. They said, how does Alabama get into the playoff? I said, okay, so Purdue beats Michigan and Michigan shutters its program. The Boilermakers make Jim Harbaugh say, you know what? Hundreds of years of football and the biggest win that we've had in 22 years. That's it. And if Michigan does shutter its program, then yes, Alabama can get it. All right.